We used the same arguments on each and talked from the same premises. I further urged all my beliefs as to the inconveniences, not to say the dangers, of such a distant expedition which would keep him away from France so long. I spoke of how he was continually being reproached for running such risks, for gambling with such splendid and mighty destinies, when he could exercise a great and powerful influence from his desk in the Tuileries. I mentioned the effect in France of risks forced on the youth of a nation, risks no longer, as aforetime, confined exclusively to the lower orders of society. I represented to him how he had already been condemned in this connection for the war in Spain, and the danger of going far away before its termination. I told him that he should strike first in Spain if he persisted in his desire for this unfortunate war with Russia. I described the country to him, the climate, the advantage the enemy would have in allowing him to advance and wear himself out by marching without the chance to fight. I reminded him of the words of the Tsar, which I had already reported. I also recalled to him the privations and discontent of the troops during his last campaign in Poland. To all my arguments, his reply was that I had turned Russian and that I understood nothing of great affairs. But if I understood nothing, sire, I retorted with a smile, why does your majesty do me the honor of discussing policy with me? I can do nothing in this matter except through love of my country and attachment to your person. Such noble sentiments cannot lead me into error and keep me in error so long. Your majesty is not so gracious towards those who are not of your opinion that you can imagine it is amusing to contradict you. Indeed, such a course, so far as my friends and myself are concerned, has not been so successful as to encourage me to continue it. It must therefore be a matter of conscience and conviction. Your majesty is carried away by false reports. You are confused and deluded as to the dangers of the course you are taking. You think you are pushing forward to a great and politic objective, and I am convinced that you are mistaken. The emperor replied with warmth that it was the Tsar of Russia who desired war. Monsieur Lauriston had informed him that all the Russian armies were on the march, even those from the Turkish frontier. The soft words of the Emperor Alexander had befogged me. He said that he had known of Russia's hostile intentions only when he sent another ambassador who informed him by every courier that the English were trading openly in St. Petersburg, and that there are even being attempts to rob Monsieur Longueroux, the aide-de-camp of the dispatches which Monsieur Lauriston had forwarded to him. The emperor was doubtless unaware that I had seen Monsieur Longueroux, and I knew about his adventure. This young officer, traveling as a courier in a heavy barouche, which was making slow progress through the sand, had quarreled with a Russian courier whose light kibitik overtook him. The Frenchman thought he had the same right in Russia as in France to stop the Russian from passing him. The other, staunch in his rights as a government courier, and with his lighter equipage, urged his postilion forward, easily overtaking and passing Monsieur Longueroux's carriage, which was half stuck in the mud. In a fury, Monsieur Longueroux fired his pistols at the Russian, who paid as little heed to the other's shots as to his threats. At Riga, the governor intervened, pointing out to the Frenchman the irregularity of his conduct, and out of regard for his position as a bearer of government dispatches, let the impetuous young man proceed. But the governor reported the matter to his court, and Monsieur Lauriston was so incensed at the conduct of his aide-de-camp that he dismissed him. This is what the emperor cited to me as an attack against one of his couriers for the purpose of robbing him of his dispatches. During this conversation with the emperor, I noticed that he was more thoughtful than usual. Some of my reflections seemed to have impressed him more than he was willing to show. The arrival of the Duke of Bassano, who was announced as bringing dispatches from Vienna, interrupted this conversation, which I felt that the emperor wished to prolong. He dismissed me and doubtless resumed in another direction the irresistible course of fatality which was drawing him forward. By this time, the emperor had already taken his decision. Austria had practically consented to become his ally. and Prussia had no alternative but to lay up a rod for her own back. Some days after my conversation with the emperor, he had sent off a portion of the household. Horses and carriages were already on the way to Dresden, ostensibly for the interview with the Emperor of Austria. The emperor left Paris on May 9th. It is said that we went to Dresden by way of Bamberg to avoid the German princelings. The truth is that the emperor wanted to avoid Weimar. He kept on saying, and the court repeated it after him, that he did not want war. Rumors were purposely spread of an interview with the Tsar Alexander, and attempts were made to find confirmation of these rumors in the mission of Monsieur Narbonne, who was sent to the sovereign's court. Dresden was reached on May 16th. The emperor and all those attached to the ministry were at pains to tinge our conduct, views, and actions with moderation in order to keep appearances on our side, and so impress Austria. To this end, particular care was taken to appear conciliatory and moderate. Efforts were also made to lull into a false sense of security those whom it desired to attack. The emperor had traveled with the empress. For 6 weeks, the whole countryside had been working to repair the roads we had to follow. The king and queen of Saxony had preceded their majesties to Plauen. There was a torchlight procession at our entrance into Dresden, where the Austrian court arrived 2 days later. Since politics was none of my business, I did not gather enough certain knowledge of what passed at that interview to enable me to relate it in detail. The emperor set things in motion to circumvent Monsieur Metternich, and especially to see that there should be echoes about his moderation and his anxiety to obtain through Monsieur Narbonne the explanations which the Tsar of Russia had refused to Austria, so as to effect a general conciliation without recourse to hostilities. For the first and perhaps the last time, the emperor spoke well of Monsieur Metternich. Russia had indeed betrayed a certain arrogance in not entering into explanations with the Viennese cabinet, which would gladly have listened to them. If this conduct showed a certain dignity, it also showed clumsiness, for it strengthened our cause in the public view and thus played into our hands. Monsieur Narbonne, who had been sent to Vilna to the Tsar Alexander, arrived back at Dresden. The emperor instructed him to see Monsieur Metternich to tell the Emperor of Austria that he wished to be known about his mission. The emperor, who thought that the part he had taken in the marriage of the Archduchess Marie-Louise, his reputation as a man of intelligence, and his relations with Prince Schwarzenberg would render Monsieur Narbonne particularly agreeable to the Austrian court, had chosen him expressly for this mission, thinking that whatever he said would have all the more effect on the mind of the imperial father-in-law. Monsieur Narbonne came to see me and told me what the Tsar had said to him, what he had observed, and what he had loyally reported to the Emperor Napoleon, who had instructed him to repeat it in part to the Emperor of Austria and Monsieur Metternich. I note, more or less, Monsieur Narbonne's exact words, for I wrote them down at the time, and this conversation having been repeated to me several times by him, I have been able to verify the accuracy of my notes. The Tsar Alexander had welcomed him cordially. He had been welcomed by everyone. Their general bearing was appropriate to the occasion, dignified but not boastful. He attended 2 reviews. The troops appeared to be a fine body of men. Monsieur Rumiansov was not there at the time of his arrival. From the outside, the Tsar had spoken to him frankly. I shall not be the first to draw the sword. I have no wish to be saddled in the eyes of Europe with the responsibility of the blood that will be shed in this war. For 18 months I have been threatened. The French army is 300 leagues from its own country and actually on my frontiers, whereas I am on my own territory. Vital points on my frontiers are being fortified and armed. Arms are being sent up. The Poles are being incited. An outcry is being raised that I harbor neutrals and admit Americans, while all the time the emperor is selling license in France, admitting vessels that are being used to carry freight from England. The emperor is swelling his financial receipts and ruining some of his unfortunate subjects. From the start, I have declared that I have no intention of doing this. I cannot take money from the pockets of my subjects to put into my own.